Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? It's week 14, baby. The playoffs are starting. It should be a fun week. Nobody's on bye. Season's getting wrapped up here. Got 15 games to get to. Everyone but the Thursday night game. So let's dive into it. We got the Vikings at the Buccaneers. Dalvin Cook, toughest matchup for running backs, but you can't sit him. Adam Thielen scored his 12th touchdown of the year last week. I think he leads the league in touchdowns, but I'm not sure. We're starting him and Justin Jefferson, who is on his way to being Rookie of the Year, if you ask me. Had his fifth 100-plus receiving yard game last week with 9 catches on 12 targets. The Vikings are one of 12 teams to have allowed 1,200 rushing yards or more this year. So as frustrating as it's been, I think Ronald Jones is still a start. Hoping Tampa Bay's coaching staff took this bye week and realized that Jones is the better running back here. Leonard Fournette under 30 total yards in 3 straight games now. Hasn't had over 10 touches since week 8. I'm sitting Leonard Fournette. And then looking at these wide receivers, Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Gronk are all still starts to me in this matchup with the Bucs coming off the bye and facing a very young and very beatable secondary in Minnesota. Cardinals at Giants. Kenyon Drake, 58 total yards and a touchdown against a really tough Rams running defense last week. I'm playing him this week. DeAndre Hopkins, only 52 yards on 13 targets last week, but he did score. Obviously, you can't sit him. I am sitting Christian Kirk, though. Had a major dud last week with only 1 catch for 2 yards on 21, or only 21 yards on 4 catches over his last 2 games. Whatever's going on with Kyler Murray's shoulder is definitely affecting Christian Kirk the most. We just saw the Giants go into Seattle and keep the Seahawks to just 1 touchdown, and it was only a 28-yard reception by Chris Carson, which brings me to my next point. The Giants have allowed the most receiving yards to running backs so far this year, and they're tied for the most receptions allowed. So I'm going to start Chase Edmonds. I said to sit him last week because of his lack of touches, and it was a good call. Only 6 carries with 2 catches, but did see 6 targets. I'm going to play Edmonds this week since Kenyon Drake's returned from injury in Week 10 against the Bills. Edmonds has 18 targets to Drake's 13. Edmonds has 53 targets on the year to Drake's 23. Edmonds' yards per reception is 3.3 yards higher than Kenyon Drake's, which may not sound like a lot, but it really is. So the matchup to exploit for the Cardinals is clearly the running backs in the passing game. I think we see Chase Edmonds have a pretty nice game here. I will definitely be looking at the receiving props for both running backs in this game, but I'll be mostly excited about Chase Edmonds' props. Wayne Gallman, I was worried about starting Gallman with the quarterback change for the Giants with Colt McCoy starting, but he had a huge game last week, 135 yards on 16 carries. I think he's worth another start here, especially if Daniel Jones plays, but we're not sure about that. He'd be a must start if Alfred Morris didn't vulture 2 touchdowns from Wayne Gallman last week. I'm definitely not starting Alfred Morris. Don't chase those fantasy points. The big question to me is Evan Ingram. He led the team in targets and receiving yards with just 32. Only caught half of his targets, but Colt McCoy seemed to like throwing to his tight end. He's got a tough matchup with the Cardinals, which is weird to say after last year, but the Cardinals are at 6th in fewest fantasy points allowed to tight ends right now. Only the Colts, Pats, Steelers, and Giants have allowed fewer touchdowns to tight ends. So Ingram will not be making my tight end touchdown ticket this week for sure. Chiefs at Dolphins. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was active for last week's game, but did not play a single snap. Of course, I had him in one of my lineups over Kenyon Drake, who ended up scoring. So that cost me 12 points, and it cost me the win in one of my fantasy leagues. Luckily, the first week of the playoffs in that league it's 2 weeks, which I'm not a big fan of, but I'm a big fan of it this year since I finished below my opponent last week. But the Dolphins have a slightly above average run defense, so I'm really hoping we get word that he's 100% ready to go and we'll get his normal amount of work, because I don't want to have to guess Sunday morning about whether or not to play this dude. Travis Kelce, on the other hand, the Dolphins have allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points to tight ends so far this year, but it does not matter for this dude. He had 8 catches on 13 targets for 136 yards and a touchdown last week against the Broncos, who were one of the better teams against tight ends until Mr. Travis Kelce showed up. And then you got Tyreek Hill. The Dolphins are tied for the 9th most explosive plays allowed to wide receivers this year. That's a pass play of over 15 yards, so this should be a good week for Tyreek Hill. Looking at the Dolphins, Myles Gaskins had 23 of the 26 RB touches last week in his return from the IR, had 140 total yards with 2 catches. He is definitely a start this week. Alex, if you're listening, I'm sorry I told you to play Devontae Booker last week over Myles Gaskins. I owe you a beer for sure. Devontae Parker, only 4 catches last week, but he's still their number 1 guy, so I'm still rolling out there. I'm still rolling Devontae Parker out there for sure. Mike Gesicki finally had one of his blow-up games, led the team in targets, catches, yards, and caught the only touchdown for the Dolphins. The Chiefs have allowed the 10th most receiving yards to tight ends, so that should at least give us a glimpse of confidence that he can have another good game here. Titans and Jaguars. Jonnu Smith is injured. I do not know what's going on with him right now. It is Thursday night at 6:30, so if by the time you're listening to this game, he could be ruled out, or he could be no longer have a questionable tag. Just gonna have to wait and see. Derrick Henry only 84 yards in their Week 2 matchup against the Jaguars, but should have a monster game. The Jaguars have allowed the 5th most rushing yards to running backs this year, so I think Derrick Henry is very excited about this matchup. AJ Green is still a must-start, if you ask me, even though Corey Davis has turned into a monster. Caught 11 of 12 targets last week for 182 yards and a touchdown. Only 1 game this year with less than 8.5 fantasy points. 6 games this year with double-digit fantasy points, and I think 2 of those he had 20-plus fantasy points. He's been great. One of his 4 touchdowns this year came against the Jags in Week 2. The Jags are the 5th best matchup for wide receivers right now, so Corey Davis has most definitely become a must-start because of his, consistency and his upside, having a game like he just did last week. On a team where you have to keep a safety in the box against Derrick Henry, and you have to keep a safety over top. You can't play one-on-one against A.J. Brown, and it's no wonder why Corey Davis is having such a good year. Anthony Firkser, with no Jonnu Smith last week, had 5 catches for 51 yards, but it was McCole Pruitt that scored. He actually had 2 touchdowns, but one of them was on like a kick fumble recovery or something weird. The Jaguars are terrible against tight ends, so if Jonnu misses this game, fire up Anthony Firkser, and I might consider one of these 2 guys for the tight end touchdown ticket. James Robinson, 90 or more total yards last week for the 9th time this year, which really is amazing considering how bad the Jaguars have been. DJ Shark led the team in targets again, but only 2 catches. Mike Glennon is spreading the ball around really well. The Titans' pass defense is not very good, though, so I would start DJ Shark. I would sit Laviska Shenault. Got lucky with his TD catch off a deflection last week. He's getting those super valuable carries here and there, but I think this Cullen Johnson guy and these tight ends are probably going to take too much from Laviska Shenault for us to consider him a start. So I'm sitting him. The tight ends, Mike Glennon targeted the duo of Tyler Eifert and James O'Shaughnessy 12 times last week. The Titans are one of the best tight end matchups, so these guys might be nice DFS options this week, might be nice and cheap for us. Fill out the rest of your roster, leave the tight end spot, and see if you can get one of these 2 guys in there. Cowboys at Bengals, very special game for one particular player. If there's a week to start Ezekiel Elliott, it's this week against the Bengals. They've allowed the third most rushing yards this year. Zeke had a pretty good game last week against the Ravens, surprisingly. If you've been waiting for a matchup to start the Cowboys wide receivers, this week is that week as well. I think the Dallas offensive line has looked a lot better over the last couple games. Dalton was able to complete 31 passes last week through 2 touchdowns. Cooper had the fewest yards and catches of the 3 wide receivers, but he did score. CeeDee Lamb could have had a massive game, but wasn't able to haul in a Hail Mary that went right through his hands at the end of the first half. Michael Gallup actually led the team in targets, catches, and yards, and he also scored. So if you're somebody that's in desperate need of a wide receiver, maybe you're the Will Fuller owner still looking for a replacement, the Panthers wide receiver owner, we got some COVID issues going on down there in Carolina. Maybe you're in a fab league and you have no fab left and you're looking for a guy you can pick up with a $0 bid. I think Michael Gallup may be available in some leagues after he was most likely dropped in a few leagues, over the past couple weeks. So especially with Andy Dalton, who I'm sure is going to be playing with just a little bit of revenge. Of course, Andy Dalton spent, 10-plus years over there in Cincinnati. Giovanni Bernard has the best matchup in this game. He had 14 touches last week, so as long as the Cowboys don't jump out to a big lead, I think Bernard could be a start for us this week. Tyler Boyd only caught 1 ball last week, but it was a 74-yard touchdown, so if you're somebody that's been holding on to him, that was a good thing to see. But I'm avoiding him and Higgins, though, with this QB, even with the Cowboys defense as bad as they are. They only put up 7 points last week, and that was, again, on a 74-yard touchdown catch by Tyler Boyd. I might consider looking at the Bengals team total under in this game because, their offense just doesn't look all that great. Texans at Bears. Kickin. I thought Brandon Cooks was going to see 10 targets easy last week. But it was Kuti that led the team in targets, catches, and receiving yards with 140. Chad Henson also had 100 yards receiving. Cooks only had 65 on 5 catches. He left the game for a hot minute because of a concussion concern, which, that is Brandon Cook, but he ended up being okay. Chicago has allowed the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but they've given up 41 explosive pass plays to wide receivers, which is 8th most in the league. They don't give up many touchdowns to wide receivers, tied for the 3rd fewest, but they can get beat deep, and that is what the Texans do best. So I'm not running away from Brandon Cooks, and I think Kiki Kuti is definitely worth a flex play after what he did last week. I will be interested in his longest reception prop as well this week. David Montgomery with another awesome matchup here, scored twice last week on 17 carries, also caught all 4 of his targets for another 39 yards. This is another week to keep him in your lineup. The Texans are one of the worst run defenses in the league. Allen Robinson is an obvious start. Cole Kmet tied Robinson for the team lead in targets, while Jimmy Graham didn't catch his only target. The Titans were a great tight end matchup. I might consider Cole Kmet for the tight end ticket this week. The Texans are also a pretty good matchup for tight end. So he's probably got a pretty nice juicy plus number for him to score a touchdown. So let me go ahead and highlight that nice and bright green for me so I see it when I go to put in my prop bets Sunday morning. Next game, Broncos at Panthers. Melvin Gordon. The Panthers have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to running backs, 131 yards on 15 carries last week for Melvin Gordon, while Philip Lindsay had only 26 yards on 14 carries. Gordon is a decent RB2 this week. Noah Fant has a great matchup. The Panthers have allowed the 5th most receptions and receiving yards to tight ends, so that's another prop bet you might want to take a look at. Tim Patrick, 2 touchdowns on only 4 catches last week. Jerry Jeudy, only 1 catch last week. The Panthers have allowed the 5th lowest yards per completion this year, but they're tied for the 11th most receptions to wide receivers. So what does that mean? It means the secondary does a decent job at keeping these wide receivers in front of them. The defense does not get beat by the deep ball very often. I think they're right in the middle of the pack as far as explosive plays allowed. So I think these guys are sits this week, unfortunately. Christian McCaffrey, if he plays, you're playing him. I don't care if he's playing with both of his hands tied behind his back. I'm still playing Christian McCaffrey. The Panthers wide receivers, as I mentioned a little earlier, DJ Moore and Curtis Samuels were among a group of 8 players that were added to the COVID list on Tuesday. So we'll have to see what's up with that come Sunday morning. The Panthers are coming off their bye here, so I think they'll be ready to go, whoever does line up at wide receiver. The Broncos have allowed the 5th fewest receiving yards to wide receivers, but DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, if they miss this game, Robbie Anderson should be a monster. Jets at Seahawks. This is a particularly special game. I don't know who has more
revenge.
I don't know if it's Jamal Adams looking for revenge on the Jets or if it's the Jets defense and the Jets whole team actually looking for revenge on Jamal Adams. But this is going to be an interesting matchup to watch. With Frank Gore leaving the game early with a concussion last week, Ty Johnson and Josh Adams got all of the work. Johnson had 22 carries and 2 catches for 117 total yards and a touchdown. Adams had 74 yards on 8 carries. So they look pretty damn good. I don't know what to do with this backfield. If the Seahawks, they did just let Alfred freaking Morris score twice and give up over 100 yards to Wayne Gallman, but I just don't see myself playing any of these Jets running backs. Maybe I'll take a look at their rushing yard props if Frank Gore is going to miss this game, but I'm not starting any of them in fantasy. Let's be real here. Jamison Crowder got back involved after 2 really bad games. Last week he had 7 targets and scored twice. As long as Sam Darnold is at quarterback and as long as Adam friggin' Gaze is still calling plays, I think we can play Jamison Crowder in PPR leagues because he should see the most targets on the team every week. Last week was the first game that Denzel Mims did not hit his receiving yard number. It was 53.5. I think he finished the game with 40 yards. I would have been interested in it, but I saw today that he is now out, so I can't take that bet. For the Seahawks, we're obviously playing Chris Carson, Tyler Lockett, and DK Metcalf. Let's just move on. Colts at Raiders. Josh Jacobs. Still questionable as of right now, so we're going to have to keep an eye on that. But let's look at the Colts real quick. Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines both scored last week. This is a great matchup for running backs. We just saw Ty Johnson and Josh Adams, what they did to the Raiders. So start both of these Colts running backs. T.Y. Hilton back-to-back weeks now with a touchdown after going scoreless through the first 11 weeks of the season. He had a huge game last week with 8 catches on 11 targets for 110 yards. Maybe him and Rivers are starting to finally connect here. T.Y. has also been a feast or famine player pretty much his entire career, but I guess he's worth another start here because if him and Phillip Rivers are really starting to brew something up. I think T.Y.'s not a bad flex play at all. Michael Pittman caught all 5 of his targets last week after only catching 2 of 9 targets the week before, so that's definitely encouraging. The Raiders are tied for the 5th most touchdowns allowed to wide receivers, so I might consider Pittman as a DFS option, but probably not starting him in any of my fantasy leagues. I do have him in my Dynasty League, but I'm only going to start him if Kenny Galladay misses again, which has just been killing me all year. Josh Jacobs, like I said, if he plays, if he doesn't play, I'm gonna. My notes are all screwed up here. If Jacobs plays, I'm probably gonna sit Booker and Richard. If Jacobs does play, I would consider playing Jacobs. Neither Booker or Richard did much at all last week with a great matchup against the Jets. Alex, again, I sincerely apologize. I thought Booker was going to have a great game, man. He had been looking pretty decent the past few weeks. He looked like he was going to be stepping into a full workload against a bad Jets defense, and it just wasn't meant to be, I guess. The Colts are one of the toughest matchups for tight ends, but it does not matter with this dude. Darren Waller, 200 yards on 13 catches with 2 touchdowns against my incredibly crappy New York Football Jets. So we're starting Darren Waller, obviously. I'm not starting any Raiders wide receivers against the Colts. A few games left here. We got Washington football team at the 49ers. Special game for Alex Smith. Why?
Revenge.
Yes, of course. Antonio Gibson left the game last week very early on. I blame him for my J.D. McKissick prop not hitting last week. We're starting Terry McLaurin and J.D. McKissick if Antonio Gibson misses this game. If they both play, I'm not sure I'd really want to play either of them against the 49ers. They have a pretty good run defense. Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert split the carries pretty evenly last week, but Wilson got 5 of the 7 RB targets. Washington has allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs this year, so between the matchup and the splitting of touches in San Francisco, I think I would avoid playing any of the 49er running backs. Saints at Eagles. Kamara and Michael Thomas are the big boys. We're playing them, obviously. If you dropped Jared Cook last week because of me, I'd like to apologize to you. I am a idiot. I thought he was fading into the useless tight end land, but he caught a touchdown last week. The Eagles have been beaten by a lot of tight ends this year, so I can see him getting into the end zone again. I'm not starting him in any of my fantasy leagues, but maybe saying that he should have been cut it was a little premature, so again, I apologize if you did that. Traquan Smith caught Taysom Hill's first career passing touchdown last week, but these two wide receivers for the Saints, these two number 2 wide receivers, Traquan Smith and Manny Sanders, are just too inconsistent for me to start, so I'm keeping Smith and Sanders on the bench. I might consider sitting Miles Sanders here. Only 10 carries and 1 target last week against one of the best matchups for running backs. Doug Peterson, what are you doing? Give your running back the freaking ball. Your offensive line is trash. Help them out just a little bit. Run the ball more than 10 freaking times, dude. Please. If Sanders was only able to average 3.1 yards per carry against the Packers, I doubt he's going to do very much against this Saints running defense. They're very good. I'm going to sit Jalen Reagor, too. Only 1 target last week. Only 11 yards on 3 catches over the past 2 weeks. I'm sitting Reagor. The only one I'm willing to start for this Eagles team right now is Dallas Goedert. He's the only one I can have any confidence in whatsoever. Falcons at Chargers. Todd Gurley, Brian Hill, Ito Smith. They have a good matchup with the Chargers, top 10 in rushing yards allowed, but it has become a legit 3-way split for touches, and none of them are all that productive. Ito Smith is the most explosive of the 3, but he is not the kind of dude who's going to handle a 16-touch workload, so I'm not playing any of them. Julio and Calvin Ridley have a somewhat tough matchup, but they're both studs, so we're starting them. Russell Gage caught the only receiving touchdown for the Falcons last week. Could be worth a flyer in DFS. Why not? Hayden Hurst with another dud last week. He had 1 catch on 6 targets for 9 yards in his 2 games against the Falcons, which is pretty pathetic considering what the Falcons have done as far as tight ends against the Falcons. But he's in a good spot to have a bounce-back game here. The Chargers are 8th in fantasy points allowed to tight ends, so I wouldn't run away from Hayden Hurst just yet. After the Jets' incredibly embarrassing performance against Darren Waller, the Falcons are no longer the worst team against tight ends, but they've still tied for the 2nd most touchdowns, tied for the 3rd most receptions, and the 8th most receiving yards allowed to tight ends. So like I said, don't run away from Hunter Henry yet. I will also be very interested in my man from the XFL, Donald Parham. Maybe he's the tight end that gets into the end zone against the Falcons this week. Packers at Lions. Kenny Galladay and DeAndre Swift are both still questionable as of right now. Aaron Jones might rush for 1,000 yards in this game. He's going to be the running back I pay up for in DFS this week. He had 168 rushing yards in week 2 against the Lions and 130 rushing yards and a touchdown last week. Devontae Adams left the game with against the Lions in week 2 with a hamstring injury, so I'm sure he'll be jacked up for this game. 6 touchdowns in his last 6 games against the Lions before week 2 of this year. He had 44 targets over the 4 games with the Lions before this year. He loves playing the Lions. So we're still playing him. Obviously, Robert Tonyan 3 games in a row now with a touchdown, 8 on the season, including his first touchdown this year was against none other than the Detroit Lions. I'm starting Robert Tonyan in my Dynasty League. If DeAndre Swift misses this game, I will 100% be playing Adrian Peterson. He's got 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games. He's averaged over 100 rushing yards per game against the Packers in his 20 career games. But I'm hoping DeAndre Swift plays. TJ Hawkinson had 3 of his best games over the last 3 without Kenny Golladay, 241 yards over the last 3 games, but no touchdowns. Hawkinson was the only guy not to score on my tight end ticket last week. We're definitely starting him, but I'm going to keep him off of my ticket this week, which means he will 100% score. So take that for what it is. Steelers at Bills. James Conner is no longer questionable. He was taken off of the COVID list. Juju, Deontay Johnson, Chase Claypool, and James Washington, random as random gets. Juju is clearly the slot short target guy. Like I said, works the majority of the time in the slot. James Washington is almost strictly the deep threat. And then Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool are kind of all over the place. They kind of do everything. Chase Claypool even gets carries. The Bills struggle a lot with slot receivers, so if I had to pick one of these 4 guys that I thought would do best here, it's going to be Juju. But this offense is so incredibly unpredictable for fantasy football. If you've been starting Deontay or Chase Claypool, you're still starting them here. But Juju is the one whose props I would be interested in this matchup. Zach Moss fumbled earlier in the game last week and didn't see another touch until the 4th quarter, so Singletary had only his 2nd game this year with over 20 touches, which is encouraging, but the Steelers still have a top 3 rush D, and Moss isn't going to fumble every week. In fact, it really wasn't even a fumble. It was a botched snap. It went under in the stats as a aborted snap. Josh Allen was trying to give it to Zach Moss on a zone read, and it ended up in Fred Warner's hands, but it was definitely the rookie's fault. Either way, I'm not going to play either of these guys in this matchup. Diggs is obviously a play, though. I think Cole Beasley is a play, too. In the 4 games without John Brown now, Cole Beasley had double-digit targets and over 100 yards receiving with 9 and 11 catches in 2 of those 4 games. So I think he's definitely worth playing in this pretty tough matchup that I'm sure Stephon Diggs will attract a lot of attention. And here we go with the, I think this is the Monday Night Football game, Ravens at Browns. Gonna have to wait and see what happens with Mark Andrews if he's taken off the COVID list. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards are both solid flex plays if you ask me. Mark Ingram has become the riskiest of the 3, but I can't blame you for keeping him in your lineup either, even in a somewhat tough matchup with the Browns, just because that's what the Ravens do. They run the ball. I think the Ravens win this game, which should mean plenty of work for all 3 running backs, but I don't see another 38-6 game like in week 1. Nick Chubb is the man, and I think I'm still starting Kareem Hunt as well. Maybe because I have to, I don't know, but he's averaged only 7 fantasy points a game over the last 3 games, but he's still a must start. He's hopefully going to get a couple catches in this game. And, if he can get a couple goal line carries, goal line targets, whatever it happens to be, he should be just fine. Jarvis Landry showed us last week what he can do as the number 1 guy. I had over 4.5 receptions last week for Jarvis Landry, and he had 6 catches in the first half. The Ravens have allowed the 9th most receptions to wide receivers. So if Landry's number is 4.5 again, I will 100% be taking that as a prop bet. I think I might even take over 5.5 if they make the number 5.5. So that's going to do it for the matchups. We're at 28 minutes now, so we're going to go over again, of course, but let's take a hot minute and drop in the podcast picks. All right, so the podcast picks for week 14. Let's get into them. My first pick is going to be the Saints, minus 6.5 at the Eagles. The Saints defense isn't getting enough love this year, if you ask me. 3rd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, fewest fantasy points to running backs right now. I think Jalen Hurts is going to really struggle in his first start here. The Eagles coaching staff makes unbelievably bad decisions every week. They put their players in bad spots consistently. The offensive line is garbage. The wide receivers are all just quick little slot guys. They don't have a true number 1 guy. The defense played a lot better last week, but still not good enough for me. They have allowed the second most rushing yards to quarterbacks as well, which is not a good spot when you got Taysom Hill coming into town. So I think Taysom Hill will have no problem picking up a handful of first downs in this game. So give me the Saints -6.5. My second pick is going to be the Colts -2.5 at the Raiders. This line is at 3 in some books, but I'm buying that hook if it is at 3, giving me the win with a field goal as opposed to a push. The Raiders got lucky last week with Greg Williams making the dumbest call in the history of defensive play calling. I think Indianapolis goes out and runs the ball, from the get-go. Jonathan Taylor's coming off of 2 straight 90-plus rushing yard games. The Raiders have allowed the 10th most rushing yards to running backs this year. I think the Raiders are going to struggle against this really good Colts defense, especially if Josh Jacobs isn't going to play. Give me the Colts to win by a field goal. And the third pick is going to be the Ravens -2.5. I did see -1.5 on DraftKings, but it is 2.5 on FanDuel. I've been going off FanDuel all year, so we're going to stay with FanDuel. Ravens -2.5 at the Browns. The Ravens won the first game of the year, 38-6. I don't think it's going to be another blowout like that, but I do think the Ravens win the game. With all these Raven running backs finally healthy, and with Mark Andrews most likely making his return in this game, at least I hope so. I think it's going to be a very run-heavy game on both sides of the ball. And I side with the Ravens in that kind of game and Lamar Jackson. The Browns have a 4-game winning streak. I think that comes to an end this weekend, and the Ravens win by at least 3 points. So give me the big truss and the Ravens -2.5. My over for this week is going to be the Vikings at the Buccaneers, which I kind of struggled with at first, but Buccaneers are going to be coming off of their bye, and they're at home. I think they're going to put up a lot of points in this one against this very young secondary with the Vikings. Tampa Bay has scored over 31 points per game over their last 3 games. Minnesota is putting up 26.5 points per game this year. So with how great the Tampa Bay rush defense is, I think the Vikings are going to have to throw the ball, which you would think should help our over here. I think it might turn into a shootout. Again, the Bucs are coming off of their bye, which is one thing for a normal team. You would think that would increase offensive productivity for most teams, but especially for a team that's got a new quarterback, a new tight end, a new wide receiver, a whole lot of turnover this offseason for the Buccaneers. So I think we're going to see the Bucs come out and put up a lot of points here. So I might be a little more confident in the Buccaneers team total over, which is 30 right now, than I am in the over of 52.5 for the whole game. But I haven't done any team totals all year, so I'm going to try and stick with it. Let's go with the over 52.5 Vikings Buccaneers for the over of the week. My under. So I really wanted to use the Patriots and the Rams as my under. I was even considering trying to record this episode last night, Wednesday night, so that way I can have it released by Thursday, but I didn't want to rush things. I'm kind of a freak when it comes to crossing the T's and dotting the I's. So the under for this week is going to be the Cardinals at the Giants, under 45.5. The Cardinals offense has not been the same over the past few weeks, only 22 points over their last 3 games. On average, that is. The Giants now, with Colt McCoy under center, put up 21 points last week. They've averaged 19 on the season. So we saw this Giants defense go into Seattle and cost me $700 last week. Extremely impressive what they were able to do to Russell Wilson and the Seattle offense. I think they can keep the Cardinals to their average as far as points per game, if not hold them slightly under that average. And Arizona's defense has definitely made a major improvement from last year. The better team is on the road here, which should help our under here. So I'm going to say the Giants and the Cardinals stay under 45.5. My touchdown scorers of this week are going to be my man, DK Metcalf. Has scored a touchdown in every home game this year except last week. The Seahawks got embarrassed at home against the Giants last week and cost me, like I said, $700. Last leg of a 6-leg parlay. Every week I've been doing one of these big boy parlays. I'll take 2 UFC fights. In the beginning of the season, it was 2 baseball props and then 2 NFL bets. I hit on one for the first 3 weeks of the season, hit on 1 or 2 throughout the whole rest of the season, and I thought last week I had this one in the bag going into Sunday with the Sunday afternoon with the Seahawks minus 6.5, and it did not work out for me. So hopefully I don't get screwed twice with the Seahawks here, but I think Metcalf and the Seahawks come out looking to destroy the winless Jets. I think they're going to unleash some pent-up anger after last week's performance. So give me DK to score. David Montgomery has scored in both of his last 2 games. He has another great matchup this week with the Lions, who have allowed by far the most touchdowns to running backs. So I think he scores again this week. So give me David Montgomery as my number 2 TD scorer. And then number 3, I'm going back to the well. Last week I had Jonathan Taylor. I'm going with him again. The Raiders have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to running backs. Taylor has scored he scored his first receiving touchdown of the week his first receiving touchdown of the year last week. I think he gets in again this week against the Raiders, who just got beat up by the Jets numbers 3 and 4 string running backs. So if they can put up numbers against the Raiders, I think Jonathan Taylor can as well. So that brings us to our road dog of the week.
Oh, you didn't know? Your ass better call somebody.
Road dog of the week, baby. So this year I think I am now 10-3 with the road dogs, which I am very much proud of. Thank you very much. This week I'm going with the Steelers plus 2.5 at the Bills. The Steelers are coming off of their first loss of the season. I'm not crazy about this pick because if you look back, the Steelers' strength of schedule is really not all that great considering the backup quarterbacks they've been playing and the teams that were dealing with COVID issues and whatnot. But as I say every week, the options as far as road dogs is getting very slim. Josh Allen has been a lot better this year than last year. And the Bills looked really good against the 49ers, but I think the 49ers secondary is not as good as it once was, and I think the Steelers go up to Buffalo with a championship mentality. I think the Steelers' defense is going to be the toughest the Bills have faced all year, and on the other side of the ball, the Bills' defense has not been world beaters themselves. I think Juju has a big game, as I mentioned earlier. James Conner was activated off the COVID list, so he should be back with some fresh legs, which should really help this offense get back to being a little more balanced. I think the Steelers have the best shot to win the game outright as far as all the road dogs this week. So give me Pittsburgh plus 2.5 to win in week 14 as the road dog of the week. And that's going to do it for the podcast this week. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I can't believe we only have 2 more weeks in the fantasy football season left. I will be doing a week 17 episode, more so built around daily fantasy and prop bets. My man Ed Davis is probably going to start joining us after week 16, and we're going to be doing like a daily fantasy thing with him. We do a FanDuel tournament at work, and he's won, I would say, at least half of them. Dude's got an eye for daily fantasy for sure. So that'll be fun. We'll do that throughout all the playoffs. So stay tuned throughout the postseason. Just because the fantasy season's over doesn't mean you can't be making money on prop bets and daily fantasy. So thanks again for tuning in. As always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.